I've never liked cemeteries. Even as a young man, I avoided them like the plague. Strange, isn't it? That now, in my old age, I come here every Saturday without fail. When I worked as a construction inspector in Danville, I'd purposely take the longer route just to avoid this place. The very sight of gravestones made my chest tighten. But things change. People change. Or maybe it's just loneliness that brings me back here week after week. Now I sit quietly on the same worn wooden bench, the one facing Agatha's grave, and I talk to her as if she can hear every word. Agatha, I brought your favorite chrysanthemums. Again, I said today, gently adjusting my glasses that always seemed to slide down my nose. I set the bouquet down and gave a small chuckle. You always told me that chrysanthemums were for the living, not the dead. But I think you'd make an exception for these. They're bright, cheerful, just like you used to be on rainy days. It's been 15 months now. 15 long, slow-moving months since we laid Agatha to rest beneath that cold slab of granite. 15 months of one-sided conversations, of sitting in silence that only the dead can keep. I know she can't hear me. I'm not delusional. But still, I come. Maybe I just need someone to talk to. Or maybe it's just comforting to hear my own voice in the wind, pretending she's listening, because at home, no one really does doubt my son Ambrose. Always busy. My grandkids? They barely glance my way. And Lorelei, well, Lorelei never liked me, and the feeling's mutual. The moment I get back from visiting Agatha, I tell myself I'm done with those Sunday visits to my son's house. I tell myself I won't let myself be humiliated anymore. But then Sunday comes, and the phone rings. And it's Ambrose calling like clockwork. He always sounds warm, like he cares. And I fall for it, every time. I trick myself into believing that maybe this time it'll be different. That maybe this Sunday someone will actually want me there. But no, every visit is the same. Lorelei greets me with that tight-lipped smile and quick eyes that scan for flaws. The grandkids barely glance up from their screens. And Ambrose? He's always caught in the middle, nervous and distracted, like he's afraid his wife and I might say too much in front of each other. This morning I sat on the bench again, talking to that piece of stone like it was my best friend. I'm 73. Now I spent 47 years with Agatha, nearly 5 decades of shared coffee cups, shared sighs, shared life. And now it's just me and this quiet slab of rock with her name carved deep into it. It doesn't talk back. It doesn't smile. But somehow, it listens better than most people I know. Just yesterday, Lorelei had the nerve to bring up the nursing home again. She tried to make it sound casual, like a helpful suggestion. Would you like to look into Sunset Hills, Tobias? They have trained staff for people your age. As if I'm not standing right there. As if I'm some fragile object too delicate to function in a normal house. I glanced at Agatha's photo on the headstone and smiled sadly. She's doing it again, I whispered, trying to pack me up like last year's holiday decorations. The wind moved through the trees overhead, rustling the leaves. I like to imagine it's Agatha sighing. She never did like Lorelei. I remember the first time Ambrose brought her home. Agatha leaned in close and whispered, "That girl has cold eyes, Tobias." I didn't say anything back then. How could I? Ambrose looked at her like she hung the stars. You were right about her, I said out loud, bending to fix a crooked stem in the vase. You were always right. Afterwards, I walked home like I always do. Dr. Burns keeps telling me that walking is good for the heart. At my age, he says, movement is everything. But I don't walk for health anymore. I walk because it fills the hours. The house I return to is as old as I am, maybe older. A 2-story wooden thing with peeling paint and creaky steps. The kind of house that moans in the wind. Agatha always wanted to repaint it. We kept putting it off, saying we'd do it next spring. But now, What's the point? Everything inside is frozen in time. I haven't moved a single thing. Not one photo, not one teacup. Even the old knit blanket on the couch still smells faintly of her lavender lotion. It's like I believe that if I don't change anything, maybe she's still around. In the walls. In the shadows. In the silence. Ambrose and Lorelei live in one of those new neighborhoods full of sleek houses with glass walls and fancy decor. Every time I visit, I feel like a relic from a forgotten time. Like a dusty chair in a showroom full of chrome. But still, I go. Because hope is a stubborn thing. That night, I brewed myself a cup of coffee like I always do and stared out the window. The house creaked, and I imagined it was Agatha settling into her armchair like she used to. My mind wandered until the phone rang. I picked up. "Dad, just calling to remind you we're expecting you for lunch tomorrow," Ambrose said, his voice rushed and clipped, like he was calling from a hallway between meetings. "Of course, I remember, son," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm not so old I forget things like that." "Good, good." "Lorelei's making roast," he added. And then he hung up before I could say another word. Typical. I spent a long time the next morning picking out my clothes. It was silly, maybe, but I knew how sharp Lorelei's tongue could be. Last time I wore an old sweater with a faint stain. On the sleeve, she kept fussing with it all night, rubbing at it with her napkin and saying things like, "Tobias, you've got to take better care of yourself." So this time, I pulled out the gray suit Agatha liked, the one we used to wear on evenings out to the theater, and a blue tie. She once said brought out the color in my eyes. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a tired man staring back. Wrinkled skin, gray wisps of hair. A sadness that sat just beneath the eyes. "You look good," I told myself, and immediately felt foolish. Their house is just 20 minutes away. I could have taken a cab, but I took the bus instead. Another thing Lorelei despises. She thinks buses are beneath people who live in houses like theirs. When I got there, her car wasn't in the driveway. Odd. On Sundays, the whole family's usually home. Ambrose opened the door. "Dad, you're early," he said, glancing behind him like he was expecting someone. "I arrived same time I always do," I said, stepping inside. "Right. Yes, of course. Come in." "Lorelei's out. She went to help Helen with something." I nodded, even though I knew Helen was on vacation. She told me just last week when I saw her at the grocery store. But I didn't say anything. Inside, the kids, Thatcher and Otelia, were glued to their phones. "Hello, my dears," I said with as much cheer as I could muster. "Hey," Thatcher mumbled without looking up. Otelia gave a brief glance, muttered, "Hi," and went back to her screen. I remember when they used to run into my arms, begging for stories about construction sites and old buildings. Now I'm just background noise. "Papa, want some tea while we wait for Lorelei?" Ambrose offered, glancing at his watch. "That would be nice," I said, following him into the kitchen. We talked a little, about work, about nothing. Then the front door opened and in came Lorelei, bags in hand, smile perfectly placed. "Tobias," she exclaimed, "you're here." I got held up at the store picking up fresh vegetables. I knew there were no vegetables in those bags, but I just nodded. "That's okay, Lorelei. Ambrose and I were just talking about his job." "Oh, that's wonderful," she said, putting the bags down and kissing her husband on the cheek. "Honey, have you told your father about your new project yet?" Ambrose looked down, uncomfortable. "No, not yet." "Tobias, your son is so talented. His design was picked for a new shopping center. Isn't that incredible?" "It is," I said, genuinely happy. "Congratulations, son. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was waiting for the official confirmation," he said quietly. Lorelei's eyes narrowed. "That came last week." I said nothing. I knew what it meant. I was being left out again, pushed to the edges of their life. I understand, I said, keeping my voice even. We all have our own things to do. Lorelai ignored me as she sorted the bags. Then she turned to the children and called out, "Thatcher, Ottilia, help set the table. Your grandfather is already here." They obeyed slowly. When I tried to hug Ottilia, she dodged me. Thatcher didn't even look at me. "Tobias, would you mind not standing in the aisle?" Lorelai said sweetly, "We're trying to set the table." I stepped aside, feeling like a piece of misplaced furniture. Ambrose focused on carving the roast. Avoiding my eyes, at last we sat at the table. Lorelai talked endlessly about her spa day, her friends, dance lessons for Ottilia. On and on, not letting anyone speak. Then she turned to me, her voice overly bright. "How was your week, Tobias? What did you do?" She said it like she was asking a child. Slow, polite, and distant. "Nothing much," I answered. Reading, going to the park, going out with friends. "Friends," she raised her eyebrows. "You still have friends?" "Lavra," Ambrose said warningly. "What?" I was just asking. At his age, a lot of people are already, you know. I clutched my fork a little harder than I should have. "Yes, Lorelai. I still have friends. Notavarian dies at 70. "Of course they do," she said with a wave of her hand. "I'm just worried about you. You live alone in such a big house. It could be dangerous." And again, every conversation somehow boiled down to the fact that I need to move. "My house isn't that big," I said, "and I'm doing just fine on my own. But what if you fall or forget tottering off the stove?" She looked at me with fake concern. "They'd take care of you in a nursing home." "Mom's right, Grandpa," Ottilia suddenly interjected. Miss Pratt from my school told me father grandfather had moved into a nursing home and was now very happy. I looked at me granddaughter, surprised at her sudden interest in the conversation, but I could see in her eyes that she was just repeating what she had heard from her mother. "Thank you for your concern, dear," I said, trying not to show my disappointment. "But I prefer to stay in my own house." "You're so stubborn, Tobias," Lorelai sighed. "Just like your wife." It was a low blow. She knew how much I longed for Agatha, and she used it. "Yes, I am," I said quietly, and proud of it. The rest of lunch passed in tense silence. The kids went back to their phones. Ambrose studied the contents of his plate diligently, and Lorelai cast irritated glances at me. When it was time for dessert, she suddenly remembered that she'd forgotten to buy ice cream. "I'm so sorry, Tobias," she said without a trace of regret. "I know how much you like ice cream." "It's okay," I said. "I'm full." "I could go to the store," Ambrose suggested, clearly wanting to escape the tense atmosphere. No, that's okay," Lorelai said quickly. "I have cookies." "Tobias, you like cookies, don't you?" She didn't wait for my answer and left the room. She came back a minute later with a packet of cookies, which I hated, and she knew it well. "Here, help yourself." She placed the plate in front of me. "Thank you, but I think I'll pass," I said. "Suit yourself," she shrugged and turned to the children. "Thatcher, Ottilia, Hohen's cookies." The kids silently took one each, keeping their phones on. I felt it was time to leave. This Sunday lunch, like all the others before it, had turned into torture. "I should probably go," I said, getting up from the table. "Already." Ambrosella looked at me with slight relief. "But it's early. I have things to do," I lied. "Thanks for lunch. I'll walk you out." He stood up and followed me to the door. Ambrose hugged me awkwardly on the way out. "I'm sorry about Lorelai," he said quietly. "She's just worried about you." I knew that wasn't true. She wasn't worried about me for a second, but I nodded because I didn't want to fight with my son. "Sure. I understand." "I'll see you next week," he asked, opening the door. "Yes, of course." I knew I would come again no matter what, because he's my son and I love him. On the way home, I thought about how my life had changed since Agatha's death, how I had become an outsider in my own son's family, how Lorai had turned mine to a burden, to be rid of. I've noticed that lately she's been absent a lot during my visits. Today, she was late. Last time she left in the middle of lunch, citing an urgent call from a friend. And every time she came back with a slight blush on her cheeks and a sparkle in her eyes that couldn't be explained by a simple trip to the store or a visit to a friend's house. Something was going on in my sister-in-law's life, something she was carefully hiding from all of us. And I was beginning to suspect that this something might have destroyed my son's family. When I got home, I sat in a chair by the window and stared at Agatha's picture for a long time. She was smiling at me from the picture, and he could almost hear her voice. "Tobias, you have to find out what's going on for Ambrose's sake." And I decided that I would find out where Lorai was disappearing to and why she was so insistent on getting rid of me. Tuesday was a day of revelation for me. I usually go to the city park on Tuesdays, sit on a bench by the pond, and feed the ducks. It's a small thing, but it's a habit that started when Agatha Wazelev. We often went there together, and now I continue. To do it alone, a kind of ritual that links me to the past. The weather was overcast that morning, but it wasn't raining. I put on my old raincoat, grabbed a bag of bread, and went to the park. It was only a 10-minute walk from my house. One of the advantages of living in the old part of Danville, Danville's Central Park wasn't too big, but it was cozy. Century oaks, neat paths, a small pond with ducks, and a few playgrounds. It wasn't usually crowded this time of year, just retirees like me and the occasional young mom with strollers. I sat on my usual bench, tossed pieces of bread to the ducks, and thought. About my son's Sunday lunch, about how Lorai was late, and about her strange behavior lately. I didn't want to think that my daughter-in-law might be unfaithful to Ambrose, but the suspicion was creeping in. I was interrupted by the sound of laughter coming from across the pond, a woman's laughter, familiar and out of place here. I looked up and saw Lorai. She was walking down the path in the company of a tall man I'd never seen before, dark-haired with a neat beard, dressed in an expensive-looking suit. He was saying something to her, leaning in close to her ear, and she was laughing, in a way she had never laughed in the presence of my son. I instinctively turned away and pulled my cap lower so she wouldn't see me. They walked past without paying attention to me and headed toward the other side of the park, where there was a small gazebo hidden from view by lilac bushes. My heart was pounding. This might just be a business meeting. Ambrose had told me that Lorai had recently taken a job at a real estate agency. Maybe this man was a client or colleague of hers. I tried to convince myself of that, but something was telling me otherwise. I thought with myself for a few minutes. Part of me wanted to walk away, to forget what I'd seen, to stay out of it. But the other part, the part that had always cared about my son, demanded to find out the truth. In the end, curiosity and concern went out. Slowly, trying not to attract attention, I walked around the pond on another path and approached the gazebo. From the side of the bushes, through the gaps in the foliage, I could see what was going on inside while remaining unnoticed. What I saw left no room for doubt. Lorai and the stranger were standing close together. His arm was around her waist, and she was looking at him with a tenderness I had never seen in her eyes when she looked at my son. Then he leaned over and kissed her, not fleetingly, but long and passionately, and she responded to that kiss. I felt the ground go from under my feet. Lorai was cheating on Ambrose. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchildren, was betraying my son. I didn't look any further. Quietly, trying not to crunch the branches, I stepped away from the gazebo and took a quick step toward the park exit. I needed to meta-reflect on what I had seen and decide what to do next. All day, I couldn't find a place to go. I walked around the house going over my options in my head. Should I tell Ambrose? But would he believe me? Lately, my son had been taking. My wife sighed more and more often in our conflicts. Besides, I had no proof but my word and an old man's word against a young woman's. I knew how this would end. Confronting Lori didn't seem like a good idea either. She could deny everything. And then turn Ambrose and the children against me even more, painting me as an old man out of his mind, making up stories. By late afternoon, I realized I needed help, someone who could gather evidence of Lorelei's treason. And I thought of Pearl Hobbs. Pearl was a friend of my late brother's. They served together on the Danville police force until Pearl retired and opened a private detective agency. We weren't close, but we kept in touch, occasionally meeting for coffee and reminiscing about old times. The next morning I called him. Pearl Hobbs here. His voice sounded just as I remembered it, low and husky. Pearl, this is Tobias Huxley, Edmund's brother. Tobias, it's been a long time. How are you, old boy? Not too bad, I stammered, not knowing how to get to the point. Listen, Percy, I need your help. Professional. There was a pause. Professional? He finally asked again. You want to hire a detective? Yes. He took a deep breath. It's about my daughter-in-law. I suspect she's cheating on my son. Another pause, longer this time. I understand. Pearl said seriously, let's meet and talk about it in person. It's better not to discuss such things over the phone. We agreed to meet in an hour at a small cafe on the outskirts of town where there were hardly any acquaintances. Polly's Coffee House was exactly fecund of place. I had envisioned for a meeting with a private detective, quiet with dimmed lights and private booths where we could talk without fear of being overheard. Pearl was already waiting for me there, sitting at a table in the far corner with a cup of coffee. The years had changed him less than I'd expected. Some piercing blue eyes, the same gray close-cropped hair, and the same strong build that had survived despite his age. He was about 65, but he looked younger. Tobias, he stood up and shook my hand firmly. Have a seat. I ordered you a coffee. Black, no sugar, if I remember correctly. Remember? I sat down across from him. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Always for Edmund's family, he sipped from his cup. Tell me what's going on with you. And I told him everything. How things had changed with my son and daughter-in-law after Agatha's death. About Laura's strange behavior lately, and finally, what I had seen in the park yesterday. Pearl listened attentively, not interrupting, taking an occasional sip of coffee. When I finished, he tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. The situation is unpleasant, he said at last, but unfortunately typical. I've dealt with it dozens of times. So you'll take the case? I asked. Sure, he nodded. But first, let's be clear about what you want. What's your ultimate plan? I wondered. What did I want? Protect Myson from his wife's betrayal? Win back his favor? To punish Lorelei for her behavior? I wanted to know the truth. I finally said the whole truth about what's going on, and then I'll decide what to do next. Pearl nodded as if he'd expected that answer. Good. I can set up surveillance on your sister-in-law. Find out who this man is, how often they meet, how serious their relationship is. I'll gather evidence, photos, videos, maybe even audio recordings of conversations if I can. Is that legal? I asked. In most cases, yes, he shrugged. I'll only monitor her in public places. No breaking and entering, no trespassing on private property. All within the confines of the law. I nodded, feeling somewhat relieved. How much will it cost? Pearl quoted an amount that made me wee-see. It was a lot of money for a retired man, but I had savings I'd been saving for Ambrose and the grandchildren. I figured it would serve them better now. I agree, I said. When can you start? Today, he pulled a notebook out of his pocket. I'll need some information. Your son and daughter-in-law's address, their daily routines, places they frequent, and, of course, a picture of Lori. I gave him all the information I had. I told him that Lori had recently taken a job at a real estate agency called Premium Homes, that she usually took her kids to school at 8 a.m., that she used to go to the Oasis Spa on Fridays. Showed a picture taken at last year's Christmas where Lori stood next to the tree, smiling, her fake smile. Great. Pearl wrote it all down in his notebook. That's enough for a start. I'll contact you as soon as I have the first results. Don't. Call me yourself if your sister-in-law is really hiding something. She might be wary. I nodded, feeling my heart pounding with excitement and fear. And another thing, Tobias. He looked me straight in the eye. Be prepared for the truth to be worse than you think, and that your son might not thank you for it. I knew he was right. I knew I was meddling into me and Elsa's life and that it could backfire on me. But I also knew I couldn't just sit back and watch Myson's family fall apart. I understand the risk, I said. But I have to do this. Pearl nodded and held out his hand to me. Then let's get to work. The next few days were filled with anxious anticipation. I lived an ordinary life, going to the store, working in Negerton, reading books, but my thoughts kept returning to Lori and her secret affair. I imagined Pearl following her, gathering evidence, learning the name of a fat man in the park. On Friday, exactly 3 days after we met, the phone rang. Tobias, it's Pearl. I have something for you. My heart skipped a beat. What was it? Not over the phone. Come to my office at 6 o'clock tonight. Y'all know the address? I did. His office was in a small building on Maple Street, not far from downtown. I'll be there, I said, and hung up, feeling my hand shaking. Pearl's office was exactly as I had envisioned it, a small room with a desk, a few chairs and file cabinets along the walls. His diplomas and private investigator's license hung on the wall. Nothing superfluous, everything functional and austere. Come. In Tobias, he pointed to the chair across from his desk. Have a seat. I sat down, trying to keep my hands from trembling. Pearl pulled a folder out of his desk drawer and placed it in front of me. Here's what I've learned these past 3 days. He said, your sister-in-law is indeed seeing another man. His name is Radley Prim, and he works as a manager for the Samerel Estate Company as she does. 42 years old, divorced, no children. He opened the folder and showed me a picture of the same man I'd seen in the park with Lori. They meet almost every day, Pearl continued. Usually at lunchtime or after work, sometimes in the park, sometimes in a cafe across town, but most often at Pine Tree Motel on the Danville exit. He showed me a series of photographs, Lori and Radley entering the motel. Lori coming out of there 2 hours later fixing her hair, Radley kissing her goodbye by the car. Apparently, their relationship has been going on for quite some time. Pearl says motel staff recognizes them. They always share the same room. I felt my insides tighten with pain and anger. It was one thing to suspect and quite another to see the evidence of betrayal in black and white. There's something else. Pearl pulled a small recorder-like device out of a folder. I managed to record their conversation in the cafe yesterday. I think you should hear it. He pressed a button and voices filled the room. First, I heard Luri's laughter, the same kind I'd heard in Thepperk, light and carefree. Then a man's voice, low and confident. When will yo finally tell him? The man asked. Soon, Radley. I promise, Laura answered. It's just not a good time. I have to deal with the old man first, his father. The man sounded annoyed. You've been talking about him for 6 months and nothing's changed. I'm working on it. Lorelei's voice was pleading. I almost convinced Ambrose to put him in a nursing home. Once the old man moves out, we'll sell his house and get the money for a down payment on our own. And if he doesn't agree, he will, she said with confidence. He doesn't favor choice. He's old. He'll be decrepit soon. Ambrose realizes he can't look after him. And I'm certainly not going to be a nurse to that bore. They both laughed and Pearl turned off the tape. There's more, he said. But I think you get the gist of it. I sat there stunned by what I'd heard. It wasn't just treason. They were planning to get rid of me to sell my house and use the money to start a new life. And Ambrose. Was my son really thinking of putting me in a nursing home? What are you going to do about it? Pearl asked, looking at me carefully. I didn't know. Part of me wanted to go to my son immediately to show him the pictures, to let him listen to the tape, but the other part was afraid of his reaction. What if he hadn't believed it? What if he took his wife's side? I need to think about it, I finally said. This is too much to decide at once. Pearl nodded understandingly. Take the folder with you, he said, and the device too. There are a few more recordings in there. Listen to them at home with a clear head. And then decide. I took the folder and the recorder, feeling their weight, not so much in my hands as on my heart. Thank you, Percy, I said. You did a good job. Just doing my job, he shrugged, but I could see the sympathy in his eyes. Call me when you decide what to do next. I might be able to help. I nodded and walked out of the office, clutching the folders. So tight my knuckles turned white. At home, I spread the photos out on the table and stared at them for a long time, as if trying to find some mistake in them, some proof that this was all a misunderstanding. But the longer I looked, the clearer the truth became. Lorelei was betraying my son, and she was planning to get rid of me. I turned on the recorder and listened to the rest of the tapes. In one, Lorelei and Radley were discussing how they would live together after she left Ambrose. In another, she was complaining about Myson, calling him spineless and boring. In the third, they talked about the children that Otelia would probably stay with Ambrose, and that was even better because Radley didn't like children. Every word was like a knife stab. It thought of my son, of my grandchildren, of how their lives would be ruined when the truth came out, and it would come out. Sooner or later, Lorelei would leave for her lover anyway, abandoning me family. I had to do something. But what? Tell Ambrose directly. But would he believe me? Wouldn't he think I was just trying to break him and his wife up out of personal animosity? Confront Laura? But what would that do but further alienate me and my son's family? I sat at the table until well into the night, going over my options and not finding the right solution. At one point, I caught myself thinking that I wished Agatha was there for me. She always knew what to do in difficult situations. But Agatha wasn't there, and I had to make the decision myself. Finally, mere morning, a plan began to form in my head. A plan that would expose the truth so that Lorelei wouldn't have a chance to get away with it. A plan that would force Ambrose to see her true colors. I called Pearl again. After calling Pearl, I felt strangely relieved. The decision had been made, and now all I had to do was wait for the results of the investigation. Pearl promised to act quickly and efficiently. I'll be watching her every day, he said. I'll try to find out how serious their relationship is and what they're planning. We agreed that he would pass the information on to me in person to avoid unnecessary phone calls. For this purpose, we chose a small cafe on the outskirts of the city where hardly anyone would recognize us. While waiting for the first results, I decided to behave as usual. On Sunday, I went to Ambrose and Laurel for lunch. Although every glance at my sister-in-law now made me feel a mixture of anger and disgust, I tried not to show my feelings, smiling, asking my grandchildren about their affairs, discussing politics and sports with my son. Lori was especially sweet that day. She offered supplements, inquired about my health, even gave me a new sweater that she said she had bought especially for me. I would have been touched by that kind of care, but now I saw it as an attempt to put my guard down. "Tobias, how have you been feeling lately?" she asked over dessert as she put a piece of apple pie on my plate. "I think you're a little pale." "I'm fine, Lori," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'm in great shape for my age." Sure. She smiled, the smile I now recognized as fake and calculating. "It's just that, at your age, you have to be especially careful about your health. My Aunt Patricia moved into a nursing home when she was that age, and it literally changed her life. There's such care, such conditions. Mom's got a point." Grandpa Thatcher interjected, still on his phone. "In school, they told us about nursing homes. They're kind of cool." I looked at my grandson, trying to figure out if he really thought that or if he was just repeating his mother's words. I wanted to ask him if he really wanted his grandfather to live among strangers instead of with his family, but I didn't. "Thank you for your concern," I said instead, "but I prefer to stay in my house. All my memories are their memories." Laura frowned, slightly as if the word had a bad taste. "But Tobias, the past is the past. You have to live in the present. And I am living in the present." I looked her straight in the eye. "The present in which I want to stay in my home." She looked away first and eyed a small victory. The meeting with Pearl took place. 3 days after that lunch. He called me early in the morning and told me he had the first results. We agreed to meet at the same cafe at noon. I arrived a little before the appointed time and took a table in the corner from where I had a good view of the hollow room. Pearl showed up at 12 sharp with a small folder under his armpit. "Their results are in, and they are impressive," he said without preamble, sitting down across from me. "Your daughter-in-law is indeed cheating on your son and has been doing so for quite some time." He opened the folder and showed me the first picture. It showed Lori walking out of an office building in the company of a tall man. They were holding hands and she was looking at him with a tenderness he'd never seen in her eyes when she looked at Ambrose. "This is Radley Prim," Pearl explained. 42 years old, works as a manager at the same real estate agency as Lorelei. Divorced. No children. According to his colleagues, he is an ambitious and rather tough person. Loves expensive things and beautiful women. He took a close look at the photo. Bradley Prim was the man I'd seen with Lori in the park. Dark hair with a slight gray at the temples, correct facial features, expensive suit, typical successful middle-aged businessman. And this Pearl showed me the next picture. It showed Lori and Radley sitting in a restaurant, leaning across the table toward each other. Their hands were touching and there were conspiratorial smiles on their faces. "It was yesterday," Pearl explained. "The Golden Lily restaurant on the other city of town. They spent almost 2 hours there, then drove to a motel." The third picture showed them at the entrance to a small motel on the outskirts of Danville. Radley was holding Lori by the waist and she was laughing with her head tilted back. I could feel my insides clenching with pain and anger. It was one thing to suspect. It was quite another to see the evidence of betrayal with my own eyes. I have something else." Pearl pulled a small flash drive-like device out of his pocket. "It's an audio recording of their conversation in the restaurant. I think you should listen to it." He plugged the device into his phone, put on his headphones, and handed them to me. I put them on and heard Lorelei's voice, so familiar and yet so foreign. "I can't wait any longer, Radley," she said. "This double life is wearing me down. I want to be with you. Only you." "Me too, sweetheart," the man's voice replied, low and confident. "But we have to tread carefully. Divorce is always a messy business, and if your husband finds out about us, He won't find out. Lurai's voice was confident. Ambrosito sent notice. Anything. He's too busy with his work and too trusting. And the children? Radley asked. They might suspect something. The children? Lurai laughed. They're at an age where they're not interested in anything but their gadgets. Besides, I raise them well. They do what I say and believe what I tell them. And the old man, your husband's father? I tensed when I heard them talking about me. Tobias? Lorelei lied again, but this time her laugh was harsh. He's too absorbed in his grief for his dead wife to notice anything around him. Besides, I'm doing everything I can to get him to move into a nursing home. As soon as he agrees, we'll sell his house and get the money for a down payment on our own. Are you sure he'll do it? Bradley sounded doubtful. Of course, Lorelei said with the confidence of someone who was Uasetto getting what she wanted. I've almost convinced Ambrose that his father can't live alone. A little more pressure and he'll suggest that the old man move in, and if he refuses, then we'll find another way. At his age, it's easy to create a situation where a man seems incapacitated. A little incident at home, an ambulance, worried relatives. You know what I mean? I felt my back grow cold. Lorelei didn't just want me to move into a nursing home. She was willing to do anything to make it happen. The recording ended and I took off my headphones, feeling stunned. This is awful, I said, looking at Pearl. She's not just cheating on my son. She's planning to get rid of me so she can sell my house. And that's not all. Pearl shook his head. Listen to the second tape. He turned the device back on and I heard Lorelei and Radley's voices again. As soon as the old man moves out and we sell the house, I'm going to file for divorce. Lorelei said, Ambro will be too busy trying to get his father settled in the new place to resist. I'll ask for minimum alimony to make things go quickly and... Smoothly. And then, Radley asked. And then you and I will start a new life. Laura's voice was filled with anticipation. A new home, a new job, maybe even a new town without Ambrose, without his boring father, without all that burden. And fecits. The children will stay with Ambrose, Lorelei said as easily as if she were talking about the furniture she'd decided not to take with her when she moved. They were old enough not to need their mother's constant care. Besides, you don't like children very much, do you? Right, Radley agreed. But won't you miss them? Maybe a little. There was no regret in Lorelei's voice. But we'll be able to see each other on weekends or holidays, and most of the time they'll be with Ambrose. He's a good father, though a lousy husband. The tape ended again, and I felt the rage growing inside. Not only was this woman betraying my son, but she was willing to abandon her children for a new lover. Was that it? I asked, trying to control myself. No. Pearl pulled a few more pictures out of Feffolder. I followed them to the motel. They spent almost 3 hours there and Fenthi went their separate ways. Lorelei got home about 5 o'clock that evening. Anne told Ambrose that she'd been late for work. I looked at the pictures of Lorelei walking into the motel with Radley and then walking out of there fixing her hair and clothes. There was a look of satisfaction on her face that was unrecognizable. How long has this been going on? I asked. More than a year by the looks of it, Pearl replied. The motel staff knows them well. They always book the Sam room, usually on Tuesdays and Thursdays. A whole year, my daughter-in-law cheated on my son, and I didn't notice. Too caught up in my own grief. Too busy with my own problems to see what was going on in Ambrose's family. What are you going to do with this information? Pearl asked. Looking at me carefully, I hesitated a moment. My first impulse was to go to Ambrose at once to show him the photographs, to let him listen to the tapes. But what if hadn't believe it? What if Lorelei convinced him that it was all a forgery, the result of my personal dislike for her? I don't know, I admitted. I need to think about it. I understand. Pearl nodded. It's not an easy decision, but whatever you choose, I'll support you. He handed me a folder of photographs and a recording device. All the evidence is here. Study them carefully and then decide. I thanked him and promised to get in touch as soon as I made a decision. At home, I spread the photos on the table and stared at them for a long time, trying to gather my thoughts. Then, I listened to the tapes again. Every word Laura had said hurting my heart, not for herself. For the son and grandchildren she was so easily willing to abandon. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to protect Ambrose from the truth that would destroy his world. The other part realized that he deserved to know who he was living with. My musings were interrupted by a phone call. It was Ambrose, Dad. His voice sounded tense. Can Laura and I come to your place at night? We need to talk. I felt my heart quicken its rhythm. Had they found out about the investigation, or had Laura decided to accelerate her plan to relocate me? Of course, son, I said, trying to make my voice sound normal. I'll expect you for dinner. I quickly stashed the photos and notes in my desk drawer, locked it, and began to prepare for the visit. I prepared a simple dinner. Roast vegetables, salad, apple pie for dessert, set the table in the living room, got the best plates.